I signed papers that changed a man's life forever. He repaid me by destroying my daughter from another country. He thought I was powerless. He was wrong. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Helen and I am 63 years old. I live in Plano, Texas, in a quiet neighborhood where people wave in the mornings and keep their lawns neat. I've lived here for more than 20 years, long enough to believe that if you treat people with honesty and care, they will do the same in return. That belief was the first thing to shatter. I am a mother. That has always been the center of my life. When my daughter was born, I made a promise to myself that no matter what storms came our way, she would never face them alone. I kept that promise through long work days, missed holidays, and nights when I fell asleep at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of me. I was never wealthy, but I was dependable. I paid my mortgage on time. I built my credit slowly and carefully. I saved every document, every receipt, every important paper because life taught me that security is built one careful step at a time. When my daughter met the man she married, I wanted to believe in him. He was polite in the beginning. He called me Mom before he had truly earned that place in my life. He spoke softly, listened attentively, and made promises that sounded genuine. He said he wanted a family. He said he wanted stability. He said he loved my daughter in a way that made me feel it was safe to place her future in his hands. I watched them build a life together, often under my roof. When money was tight, I helped with rent without hesitation. I supported them quietly the way I always had. And when immigration became part of their journey, I didn't pause to question it. I was the one with steady income. The one with clean records. The one the lawyers said would make the process straightforward. So I signed. I signed papers that asked me to take responsibility for a grown man's future. I signed knowing that if he failed, the burden would fall on me. I signed because I trusted him. And I signed because my daughter looked at me with hope in her eyes and said, "Mom, this will fix everything." For a while it felt like it had. He grew confident, too confident. He talked about travel, about opportunities, about how things would be different once everything was approved. I noticed small changes. Gratitude faded. Calls became fewer. There was a sharp impatience when I asked simple questions. I brushed it aside and told myself I was being overprotective. Mothers do that, I said. We worry too much. Then he traveled abroad. He told us it was temporary. He said it was for business. He promised he would be back soon. I believed him because believing was easier than imagining the truth waiting on the other side of that departure. The call came late at night. My daughter's voice was thin, fragile, almost unfamiliar. She didn't cry at first. She sounded stunned, like someone who had been pushed underwater and was still trying to understand how they ended up there. She told me divorce papers had arrived at her door. No conversation. No explanation. Just documents. Final. Filed from another country. I remember standing in my kitchen holding the phone in one hand and gripping the counter with the other, feeling my knees weaken. Shame came before anger. Shame that I had trusted the wrong person. Shame that my signature had opened a door he walked through without a second glance back. I called family members. Some listened. Some went quiet. A few said things that still echo in my mind. It's not our problem. She'll recover. Don't make it worse. Their silence cut almost as deeply as his betrayal. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my dining table and stared at the folder where I kept everything. Every form, every approval, every email. I had always been organized. I never imagined that habit would one day become my daughter's shield. I didn't cry forever. I didn't scream. I didn't rush. I waited. Because somewhere deep inside me, beneath the shock, beneath the guilt, something steady was waking up. And it wasn't finished yet. I have always been the kind of woman people lean on. I am 63 years old now, but even when I was younger, responsibility settled into me as naturally as breath. I carried it without complaint, the way some people carry their name. After my daughter's father passed away, I raised her mostly on my own, and in that quiet grief, I learned how to be strong without announcing it. I worked steadily. I paid my bills on time. I kept my promises. Over the years, I became the one my family called when something broke, when money ran short, or when a decision felt too heavy to make alone. Before everything fell apart, my heart was full of hope. My daughter seemed happy, at least that's what I believed. Watching her build a marriage made me feel like I had done something right as a mother. I felt proud that she had found someone she loved, someone she believed she could build a future with. I told myself that all the years of sacrifice had led to this moment. Her stability, her happiness, her chance at a life that felt lighter than the one I had carried. Back then, my emotional state was calm and trusting, almost peaceful. I believed deeply in routine. I believed in effort. I believed that if you paid close enough attention, people would eventually show you who they really were. What I didn't understand was that sometimes people don't reveal themselves. They perform. My son-in-law entered our lives carefully, almost strategically. He was respectful in a way that felt practiced, not spontaneous. He offered to help with small things, carried groceries without being asked, checked in about my work. He knew how to say the right words at exactly the right moments. When he talked about his future, he talked about family, loyalty, and gratitude. Those words mattered to me. I was raised to believe that what a person says reflects what they intend to live by. I treated him like my own child. I defended him when others questioned his motives. I welcomed him into my home without hesitation or reservation. When immigration paperwork became part of their life, I didn't see it as a burden. I saw it as an extension of my role as a mother. If my stability could help protect my daughter's marriage, then helping felt not just reasonable but necessary. Looking back now, I can see how much I wanted things to work. I wanted to believe that love and responsibility were enough to hold a family together. I wanted to believe that my judgment was still sharp, that time and age had not dulled my instincts. The truth is, I trusted him because I trusted myself. In our conversations, he often spoke about opportunity and independence. He talked about how difficult his past had been, about how grateful he was for the chance to start fresh. I listened closely. I encouraged him. I reassured him. Never once did it cross my mind that he might be looking at me not as family, but as a means to an end. My daughter adored him. And that mattered more to me than anything else. When she smiled, when she spoke about him with genuine excitement, I felt reassured. I told myself that if she felt safe, then I could finally relax. What I didn't know was that the safety she felt was already slipping away, quietly and out of reach. At that point in my life, I didn't see myself as powerful. I saw myself as dependable. I believed my role was to support quietly, to step back when needed, to stay steady in the background. I had no idea that the same patience I had practiced for decades would soon become the very thing that saved us. Because while I was busy being the strong one behind the scenes, someone else was counting on me to remain exactly that way, silent, trusting, and out of the way. Before the conflict ever showed itself, my life moved to a quiet, familiar rhythm. I woke up early every morning, usually before the sun had fully risen. I made my coffee the same way I always had, stood by the kitchen window, and let the stillness settle my thoughts before the day began. I went to work, came home, and checked in on my daughter. That routine grounded me. It gave me peace. Made me feel useful. It reminded me that I still mattered. My daughter and her husband lived close enough that I could help without hovering. Sometimes it was something small like picking up groceries. Other times it was covering a bill until the next paycheck came through. And often it was just listening, sitting quietly while my daughter talked through her worries. I never complained. I never kept track. To me, family support wasn't something you measured or expected to be repaid. It was something you gave freely and without conditions. On the surface, my family treated me with respect. They called me responsible, reliable, the one who always has it together. Those words sounded kind, but beneath them lived an unspoken assumption that I would always step in. If something went wrong, it was understood that I would handle it. No one asked how it affected me. No one asked if I was tired. Strength, I learned, often invites silence from others. My son-in-law benefited from that more than anyone. He grew comfortable quickly. Too quickly. He stopped asking and started assuming. If there was a problem, he turned to me. If paperwork was confusing, he handed it over. If something needed explaining, he waited for me to speak. At first, I told myself this was trust. I told myself he respected my experience, that he valued my steadiness. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't sit right. He rarely thanked me anymore. When I asked simple questions about his plans, his tone shifted, growing short and distant. He answered quickly, vaguely, as if my curiosity was an inconvenience. When immigration documents arrived, he barely glanced at them before passing them to me. "You know this stuff better," he said with a smile. But that smile never reached his eyes. I was deeply involved in their immigration process. I attended meetings. I gathered documents. I tracked deadlines carefully. I knew exactly what I was agreeing to, and I understood the responsibility I carried. I also knew that if anything went wrong, my name would be the one attached to it. I accepted that weight without complaint. What I didn't realize was that, somewhere along the way, he had already stopped seeing me as family. There were red flags I chose to ignore. He spoke more about what he deserved than what he was grateful for. He talked about my daughter's role in his life as if it were flexible, temporary, something that could be adjusted if it stopped serving him. When I tried to gently raise my concerns with my daughter, she brushed them aside. She said he was stressed. She said the immigration process was wearing him down. So I chose peace over suspicion. Looking back now, I understand how manipulation works best when it stays quiet. It doesn't arrive with shouting or cruelty. It comes wrapped in convenience and charm. In just enough kindness to keep you from questioning intent. By the time the approval finally came through, he was already emotionally gone. I just didn't know it yet. The betrayal did not arrive loudly. It didn't announce itself with shouting or chaos. It slipped in quietly, disguised as life continuing exactly as it always had. The approval came through on a weekday afternoon. My son-in-law looked relieved but not grateful. He hugged my daughter, made a few phone calls, and immediately began talking about plans. Travel plans, opportunities overseas. He said there were things he needed to take care of before coming back for good. I remember standing in my kitchen listening to him speak and feeling a small knot tighten in my stomach. I noticed it. And then, like so many times before, I ignored it. A few weeks later, he left the country. At the airport, my daughter cried softly into his shoulder. I stood a few steps behind them, telling myself this was temporary. He promised her he would call every day. He promised he would be back soon. He kissed her forehead, then turned to me and thanked me quickly, almost casually, before walking away. I told myself he was nervous. I told myself stress makes people distant. I told myself not to read too much into it. For a short while, things appeared normal. He called less than he said he would, but he did call. His messages grew shorter, more formal, stripped of warmth. When my daughter asked when he was coming back, he avoided answering directly. He blamed work. He blamed paperwork. He blamed time zones. There was always a reason, always a delay. Then one evening my phone rang and everything collapsed. My daughter was crying so hard she could barely get the words out. She told me an envelope had arrived in the mail. Addressed to her. Inside were divorce papers, signed and filed from another country. No warning. No conversation. No explanation. Just documents. Final. Clinical. Ending a life she believed she was still living. My chest tightened as she spoke. I asked her to read it again, hoping, desperately, that she had misunderstood something. She hadn't. He had filed for divorce abroad without telling her, without coming home, without facing any of us. The humiliation hit me all at once. I had sponsored his future. I had welcomed him into my home. I had sat in offices and signed documents that placed legal responsibility squarely on my shoulders. And he had taken that stability and walked away from my daughter as if she were disposable. As if she were an inconvenience he could leave behind. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. That silence was louder than any argument could have been. When I reached out to extended family, the responses cut even deeper. Some avoided my calls entirely. Others spoke in careful, distant tones. A few said things I will never forget. It's between them. You can't control adults. Don't make a scene. No one asked how my daughter was holding up. No one asked how it felt to realize my trust had been used so deliberately. That night, my daughter sat on my couch, staring at the wall, her hands trembling in her lap. I held her the way I used to when she was small, even though she was grown now. I felt guilt pressing down on me from every direction. Guilt for trusting him, guilt for signing those papers, guilt for believing that kindness alone could protect us. But beneath that guilt, something else began to take shape. Clarity. He had made his decision from far away, believing distance would shield him. He believed that once he was gone, nothing could touch him. He had no idea how wrong he was. The days after the divorce papers arrived blurred into one another. Time lost its shape. My daughter stopped eating. She slept on my couch with the television on all night, not watching, just needing the sound so her thoughts wouldn't swallow her whole. I watched her grow smaller in front of me, retreating into herself, and every time I looked at her, the weight in my chest pressed down a little harder. I blamed myself more than I blamed him. I replayed every conversation I had ever had with my son-in-law. Every smile that now felt rehearsed. Every promise that had sounded so convincing. Every moment I had defended him without hesitation. I asked myself how I could be so careful in every other part of my life, yet so blind when it came to him. As a mother, that kind of guilt doesn't just hurt your heart. It attacks your sense of who you are. At night, when the house finally went quiet, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. My thoughts circled endlessly. If I had asked one more question. If I had slowed the process down. If I had trusted my instincts instead of pushing them aside. Each thought landed like a punishment I felt I deserved. My daughter tried to be strong for me. She told me she would be okay. She said she didn't want me to worry. But I could see the fear she couldn't hide. Fear about her future. Fear about money. Fear that she had been abandoned in a way that made her feel disposable. As if her life had been put on pause without her consent. I felt trapped between two unbearable choices. One part of me wanted to stay silent. To accept what had happened and focus only on helping my daughter heal. To avoid conflict. To avoid embarrassment. To avoid admitting, to myself and to others, that I had been used. The other part of me felt something darker but steadier. A quiet anger that didn't scream or shake. It didn't demand attention. It simply waited. That part of me kept returning to the same question again and again. Why should he walk away clean? At first I felt powerless. He was far away. He had already filed legal documents. He had moved first before we could even catch our breath. Everyone around me seemed convinced there was nothing to be done. They spoke in soft, resigned voices, as if betrayal were just an unfortunate chapter you were meant to endure and move past. But I couldn't accept it. Not while my daughter cried herself to sleep. Not while my name was still attached to promises I had made in good faith. Not while he believed distance had erased responsibility. Slowly I began to understand something painful and important. Silence was exactly what he expected from me. He expected me to absorb the damage quietly the way I always had. To clean up the mess. To protect everyone else's comfort at my own expense. That realization shifted something deep inside me. For the first time since the papers arrived, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong. I started asking what I still had the power to do right. I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing with certainty. I was done being ashamed. I was done protecting someone who had hurt my child. And I was done believing that age meant weakness. I wasn't ready to act yet. But I was no longer lost. It was during one of those sleepless nights that clarity finally settled in. The house was still, my daughter asleep on the couch, and the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I found myself sitting at the dining table again, the same place where I had stared at that folder days earlier, frozen by shock. This time my hands didn't hesitate. I opened it. Inside were copies of everything. Every form I had signed. Letters from attorneys. Emails confirming timelines and responsibilities. I had always been careful, almost meticulous. I never threw important things away. Back then it was just habit, something life had trained into me. Now it felt like instinct had been quietly protecting us all along. That was when the truth fully settled in. They didn't know how involved I really was. Everyone assumed I had only helped a little. They pictured a supportive mother who signed a paper or two and stepped aside. No one understood that I was the primary sponsor. That my income, my records, my guarantees were the backbone of his approval. That without me nothing would have moved forward at all. And then something else became clear. Sponsorship was not a favor you did once and forgot. It was a legal commitment built on trust and good faith. And that trust had been shattered. I didn't rush to tell anyone what I had realized. I didn't even tell my daughter right away. She was still fragile, still trying to breathe through the pain, and I refused to offer hope until I knew it was real. I needed certainty before I spoke a single word. So I began to educate myself. Quietly, carefully. I read government websites late into the night, scrolling through pages while the house slept. I reviewed the obligations tied to sponsorship. I took notes in the margins. I highlighted timelines. I learned what changed when circumstances changed. Divorce, abandonment, misrepresentation. Every word mattered. Every detail carried weight. Then I made calls. Not emotional calls. Calm ones. I spoke with an immigration attorney and asked questions without sharing names at first. I described the situation plainly without anger or accusation. I listened more than I spoke. I asked what options existed when a sponsored individual acted in bad faith. The answers weren't dramatic. They were measured, realistic, but they were enough to confirm what I was beginning to understand. I went through my emails next, one by one. Messages where he talked about plans that never included my daughter. Messages where he spoke about independence and starting fresh, long before he ever left. At the time they had seemed harmless, ordinary. Now placed side by side they told a story I could no longer ignore. This was my quiet planning phase. I didn't cry while I worked. I didn't feel rushed. For the first time since the betrayal I felt steady, focused. I understood then that power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from patience, from preparation, from knowing exactly where you stand. By the time the sun began to rise, I knew one thing for certain. He believed the story was over. I knew it had just reached its turning point. The moment I stopped crying and started acting didn't feel dramatic at all. It felt quiet, almost ordinary. But somewhere deep inside me something finally settled into place. I made my decision on a Tuesday morning. The kind of morning where the sky looks the same as always, and the world outside your window keeps moving forward, even when your own life feels split open. I was standing at the sink washing a single coffee mug when it hit me. I was done waiting for someone else to fix what had been broken. I was going to protect my daughter. And I was going to protect myself. No matter what it cost emotionally. No matter how uncomfortable it became. I sat down at my desk and made the first official call that would quietly change everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I spoke calmly and clearly, laying out the facts just as they were. I explained my role. I explained the change in circumstances. I asked what steps were required to formally report a sponsorship breakdown due to abandonment and divorce. The voice on the other end was measured and professional. There were no promises, no dramatic assurances. They explained the process. They explained the documentation required. They explained the timelines involved. That was all I needed. I had never needed guarantees. I needed direction. From that moment on, every step I took was intentional. I gathered records in careful chronological order. I printed emails and saved digital copies. I wrote down dates, when he left, when the divorce was filed, when my daughter received the papers. I documented everything the way I had handled my entire life. Methodically, patiently, without letting emotion blur the facts. I informed my attorney that I was ready to move forward. I authorized the next steps. I followed instructions exactly as they were given. I didn't discuss it with family members. I didn't warn him. I understood too well that real action doesn't announce itself before it happens. In the evenings I sat beside my daughter and listened. I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. I didn't burden her with details she didn't need. I told her only what mattered most, that she wasn't alone, and that she wasn't wrong for trusting someone who claimed to love her. Inside me something returned that I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Not the kind that seeks to overpower others. The kind that comes from knowing where you stand. From standing firmly in truth. From understanding that patience is not the same as passivity. He believed he had ended the story by sending papers from far away. He believed distance made him untouchable. What he didn't know was that I had already taken the first step toward bringing accountability back into his life. And once that process began, there was no turning back. The confrontation didn't unfold the way people usually imagine moments like that. There was no shouting. No slammed phones. No dramatic threats. It arrived quietly through a family call he clearly hadn't anticipated. He reached out first. At the beginning, his messages were short and careful. He asked how my daughter was doing. He said he hoped we could all move on peacefully. The words felt practiced, almost scripted, like something he'd been advised to say rather than something he truly felt. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. Silence has a way of unsettling people who are used to controlling the narrative. When I finally agreed to speak, I kept my voice steady. We were on a video call. He appeared confident at first, sitting comfortably, speaking as though nothing permanent had taken place. He thanked me for taking the call. He said he wanted to clear the air. So I let him talk. He explained the divorce as if it were unfortunate but necessary. He spoke about personal growth. About needing space. About how things just didn't work out. He never apologized. Not once. He never mentioned my daughter's pain. And he spoke to me as if I were supposed to understand, as if I should quietly accept his version of events. When he finished, I spoke. I told him I wasn't calling to discuss his feelings. I told him I was calling because I needed to inform him of something important. Calmly and clearly, I explained that I had taken formal steps to withdraw my sponsorship due to abandonment and a material change in circumstances. I told him documentation had already been submitted. I told him the process was now under review. First he laughed. Just a small, uneasy laugh. He said I couldn't do that. He said everything had already been approved. He said it was too late. That was the moment his confidence fractured. I told him I understood the process very well. I reminded him whose income had supported the application, whose records had stood behind his approval, whose name carried legal responsibility. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I didn't need to. I simply stated facts. I watched his face change. His questions came quickly then, too quickly. He wanted to know what I had submitted, who I had spoken to, what this meant for him. The calm expression he had worn slipped away, replaced first by urgency, then by something closer to fear. I told him I wouldn't discuss details beyond what was appropriate. I told him the matter was now out of my hands and officially in review. And I told him, quietly, that I hoped he would face whatever came next with the same composure he had shown when he sent divorce papers from a distance. The call ended shortly after that. Within hours, family members began calling me. Some were confused. Some were upset. Some were suddenly very concerned about keeping the peace. I listened to every one of them. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend my choices. I said only this. I was protecting my child. And I was done being silent. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in stages, each one heavier than the last. At first there was only official silence. Weeks passed where nothing seemed to move. That waiting tested me more than anger ever could. I kept going to work. I kept caring for my daughter. From the outside, life looked unchanged. But beneath the surface, everything felt suspended, like we were all holding our breath, afraid to exhale. Then the notices began. He received requests for additional information. He called my daughter in a panic, not to apologize, not to ask how she was holding up, but to ask what I had done. He wanted reassurance. He wanted answers. He wanted me to fix it the way I had fixed everything for him before. This time I didn't answer. Immigration authorities reviewed the file carefully. They asked questions. They examined timelines. They looked closely at the sudden divorce, the abandonment, the changes in circumstances that had never been disclosed. Everything I had documented mattered now. Every date. Every email. Every form I had saved. What once felt like ordinary paperwork had become the quiet backbone of the truth. As the process moved forward, the pressure from family intensified. Relatives who had stayed silent suddenly found their voices. They told me I was being harsh. They said I was ruining a man's life. They urged me to think about the consequences, as if I hadn't spent countless nights doing exactly that. Not one of them asked what my daughter had lost. Not one of them asked what it felt like to watch your child be discarded from across an ocean. I stayed calm. The shift in power was unmistakable. For the first time he was reacting instead of acting. His messages grew frantic. His tone changed completely. The confidence he once carried dissolved into desperation. He talked about misunderstandings. About reconciliation. About how everything had gone too far. I didn't respond. When the official decision finally arrived, it was clear and final. His visa status was revoked due to misrepresentation and failure to maintain the conditions under which sponsorship had been granted. Deportation proceedings followed soon after. My daughter cried when I told her. Not tears of celebration. Tears of release. For weeks she had carried the weight of betrayal alone. Now she finally felt seen. She finally felt believed. Socially, the fallout was immediate. People who had once dismissed the situation grew quiet. Those who had questioned my actions avoided my eyes. The story they had told themselves, that I was an overreacting older woman, no longer held. For the first time in months I slept through the night. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Justice, when it arrives quietly, doesn't need an audience. It simply settles where it belongs. And with it came something I hadn't felt since before the betrayal. Peace. The confirmation arrived on an ordinary afternoon. There was no dramatic phone call. No raised voices. Just an official notice, written in careful, measured language, stating that the review was complete and the decision was final. His visa had been revoked. He was required to leave. The future he had built on borrowed trust had come to an end. I sat at my kitchen table and read the notice twice, slowly letting every word settle. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel relief. I felt steady. The kind of steadiness that comes when something heavy, something you've been carrying without realizing it, is finally set down. I told my daughter that evening. She sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, listening without interruption. When I finished, she closed her eyes and released a long, trembling breath, like she had been holding it in for months. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against my shoulder, the same way she used to when she was small. "I can finally breathe," she whispered. That was my victory. Not the paperwork. Not the outcome. But watching my child begin to feel safe again. Over the next few weeks, life slowly began to rearrange itself. My daughter started sleeping through the night. She returned to work. She laughed again, softly at first as if she were testing whether joy was still allowed. We talked about the future without fear tightening every sentence. We made plans that didn't revolve around him, didn't include his shadow. The family dynamic shifted as well. Those who had doubted me stopped questioning my choices. Those who had tried to pressure me into silence backed away. I noticed something important during that time. No one apologized. But they no longer underestimated me either. And somewhere along the way I regained something I hadn't realized I had lost. My voice. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped justifying decisions made to protect my child. I stopped carrying the emotional weight of other people's discomfort. I stood firmly in the truth that boundaries are not cruelty, and justice does not require permission. At 63 I had been labeled many things. Dependable. Predictable. Soft. What they learned too late was that patience is not weakness. Kindness is not surrender. And age does not erase resolve. I didn't ruin a man's life. I refused to let mine and my daughter's be destroyed in silence. That was the moment I knew we had won. Now when I look back on everything that happened, I don't see myself as a woman who took revenge. I see myself as a mother who chose dignity over fear. For a long time I believed strength meant endurance. I believed it meant staying quiet, absorbing pain and holding the family together no matter the cost to myself. I told myself that patience meant acceptance, that love meant tolerating whatever was placed in front of me. This experience taught me something far more honest. It taught me that endurance without boundaries is not strength at all. It is surrender. I learned that trust must be earned again and again, not granted once and protected forever. I learned that protecting your child doesn't end when they grow up. It simply takes a different form. And I learned that when you stand firmly in truth, you don't need to raise your voice for it to be heard. What surprised me most was discovering my own resilience. At 63 I was told, sometimes gently, sometimes not, that I should stay out of it. That I was too old to interfere. Too emotional. Too involved. But age did not weaken me. Sharpen me. Gave me perspective. It gave me the patience to wait instead of react, the discipline to prepare instead of panic, and the courage to act when the moment truly mattered. My daughter is rebuilding her life now, slowly and carefully. She is stronger than she realizes, and I remind her of that whenever doubt finds its way back in. We talk openly. We laugh more easily. We trust again, but this time with wisdom and clear eyes. As for me, I move through the world differently now. Not heavier, but lighter. I no longer feel the need to prove my worth by sacrificing myself. I know where I stand. I know what I will tolerate. And I know that silence is a choice, not an obligation. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Never confuse kindness with weakness. Never allow your patience to become someone else's permission. And never believe that it is too late to stand up for yourself. Age did not make me fragile. It made me fearless. And that changed everything. I tell this story now not because I enjoy reopening old wounds, but because silence protects the wrong people. For a long time I believed keeping the peace was my responsibility. I thought that if I stayed calm, stayed kind, stayed patient, everything would eventually work itself out. What I learned instead is that peace built on injustice is not peace at all. What happened to my daughter changed the way I see the world. It showed me how easily kindness can be mistaken for weakness, especially when it comes from an older woman. People assume you will bend. They assume you will stay quiet. They assume time has taken something from you. What they fail to understand is that time gives you something powerful: clarity. I am 63 years old. I have lived long enough to know that life does not always reward goodness right away. Sometimes it tests it. Sometimes it waits to see whether you will abandon yourself just to keep others comfortable. This was my test, and for the first time I chose not to step aside. I didn't act out of anger. I acted out of responsibility. Responsibility to my child. Responsibility to myself. Responsibility to the truth. I followed the law. I respected the process. I allowed facts to speak louder than emotion. And in doing so, I reclaimed something that had quietly slipped away over the years: my self-respect. My daughter is healing now. She smiles more easily. She speaks about her future without fear tightening her voice. Watching her rebuild has taught me that protection doesn't always look like shelter. Sometimes it looks like standing firm when everyone expects you to fold. As for me, I am no longer afraid of being misunderstood. I no longer seek approval from people who stayed silent when it mattered most. I know who I am. I know what I did. And I would do it again to protect what truly matters. If you're listening to this and you feel small, overlooked, or used, especially if you are older, I want you to hear this clearly. Your age is not a weakness. Your patience is not permission. And your voice still carries weight. Mine did. And it changed everything. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If this touched your heart, please like the video and share it with someone who needs strength today. And before you go, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your words remind me that none of us are truly alone.